then it's a direct increase in the price. If the import is through a corporation, then the corporation has to decide, or a business, it has to decide how much of that additional cost does it want to pass on to the consumer, and how much does it want to absorb. And obviously, there's a lot of factors that relate to that, but one must keep in mind that when you're dealing with corporations, boards of directors have duties of loyalty to their shareholders, not duties of loyalty to a country. And so therefore, in the end, while they might end up absorbing some of the additional cost initially, they may not be willing to absorb the cost over time. If we look at what Trump first proposed on his, I think he called it Liberation Day, whatever the name he put to it, he asserted that they were reciprocal tariffs, but they really were not reciprocal tariffs in the plain meaning of the word reciprocal. Basically, what he did is he did a mathematical calculation, or had his people do a mathematical calculation to calculate what would the tariff rate have to be in order to eliminate the trade deficit with the respective countries. Well, that's not really a reciprocal tariff. Now he's trying to move more towards the traditional meaning of the term reciprocal, whereas if you're going to charge us 15% on certain goods coming into your country, we'll charge you 15% for those same types of goods that are coming into our country. He was proposing to do this across the board. He was proposing to do a 10% minimum tariff virtually on anything. Last year, our average tariff was 2.5%. And we generated about $77 billion in tariff revenue last year. So obviously, if tariffs are going to be up higher than an average of 2.5%, then there's going to be significant additional revenues that are going to be achieved. Those estimates have ranged anywhere from $300 billion to $700 billion a year in additional tariff revenues. Depending upon what the final numbers are that are negotiated. As you know, and our listeners probably know, agreements have been reached with the UK, European Union, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines. Talks are underway with a number of other countries, including India, including China. We've kind of reached a stalemate right now with two of our biggest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. Hopefully that's going to get resolved because they're two of our biggest trading partners. And hopefully the deals that were just reached, over the last week, between the EU and Japan can serve as a model for other deals. Trump has now provided a little bit more flexibility on timing. I think he's saying he's given another 10 to 12 days. There's a lot of question about how things are going to end up with China. And there's also a lot of question about how things are going to end up with Russia. We don't do a lot of trade with Russia. But on the other hand, there are ways that can be put pressure on other countries that do a lot of trade with Russia. For example, China, India, Iran. They import a lot of energy from Russia. And the deal that was done with the European Union, part of the deal was that they're going to buy a lot more oil and gas from the United States and less from Russia. And as you know, the Russian economy relies heavily on energy resources. And so we'll see how this thing is going to play out. As you know, Nick, up until 1913, when we end up imposing an income tax, among other things, at the federal level on a recurring basis, up until the late 1800s, the United States, most of its revenue came from tariffs. But the world was a very different place then. The other thing you have to keep in mind is, maybe we get another $300 billion a year in tariff revenue. That could be possible, depending upon what the average tariff rate ends up being. It ain't going to be anywhere near $700 billion, which is what the Commerce Secretary was suggesting. But let's say we get $300 billion a year in tariff revenue. We're running deficits of about $2 trillion a year. So, let's put things in perspective here. And, we still haven't done anything to really address the major structural deficit problem that we have. So those are just a few introductory comments. Interested in what you have to say, and anybody else who's going to be joining us today.
Yeah, we're going to have people join us from around the world, and I'm sure they're going to have something interesting to say regarding these tariffs, because they do affect other countries. We're going to bring in Dr. Sharif.
Well, they affect them in many cases more than us, right?
Yeah, they're affected over in Bangladesh because they actually have a big textile industry over there. And then, of course, our neighbors to the north in Canada, they're affected a lot there also as well. So when the tariffs hit, and of course, we have our commentary coming in from Los Angeles. We have Rick Rosner, whose friend, I think, Steve Colbert was fired from CBS. So they're still lamenting his departure. But we'll start with Dr. Sharif, because the thing is, Bangladesh, we import a lot of goods and textiles over there into the United States. And I'm not even sure how the negotiations are going, Dr. Sharif, in terms of Bangladesh and the United States. It's a big country, 170 million people. He always says it's small, but he's been nice. 170 million is a lot of people over there.
He's talking geographically rather than population.
Oh, geographically it's small, but population
geographically.
That is one huge amount of people over there, and they're all young people too. So it's kind of a very interesting country. Yeah. So Dr. Sharif, what's going on over in Bangladesh?
Yeah, this is very interesting discussions, and I believe that many of the audience, especially the Garments Owners Association, they will observe our shows today. I already shared the show with our Bangladeshi policymaker, defense, and all of the people. So first thing first, this is very interesting movement. I see that Bangladesh committed to buy 25 Boeing aircraft from USA. Maybe they want to negotiate these issues. That is the issues Trump want to solve. They want to ensure more business. So Bangladesh already informed that we want to buy 25 Boeing aircraft from USA. Maybe there will be a positive move. Secondly, I want to request because Mr. David Walker, many Bangladeshi policymaker, businessmen, they know Pot TV, they know you very well. Actually, yes, it's a government level discussions. Maybe Bangladesh government and American government is discussing the whole things, but mainly burden goes to the businessmen. Businessmen are normal people like you and me, and they are very, very worried what will happen with their garments industries. Let's say Bangladesh, they have to make the compliance based on the European Union, based on the USA. So they invest huge amount of money. I saw many of them are very, very worried about this tariff issue. So if you have some sort of strategy from your side, maybe it will be helpful. But for Bangladesh markets, I have three specific points. I will request if we give or increase market access for the US product, I am sure the tariff will be reduced for Bangladeshi point of views. And if we go for growth, the technology, product diversifications, make more business with USA, and it can drive export and all of the things. And my final points, strengthening the bilateral investment and trade diplomacy. I think this is absent in Bangladesh. How we can go for bilateral discussions and trade diplomacy, which is absent. So I will request Mr. Nick Palveda. I'm working with US Embassy Bangladesh. We are proposing for some grant and other things. So this kind of dialogue, if we can organize in a formal way, let's say the Bangladeshi businessman, US Embassy in Bangladesh, and all of the expert people like David Walkers and you and all of the expert people, if they can contribute, then the business organization, they can learn and they can grow fast. That is most important and difficult part for this tariff negotiation. Business people do not know much how to solve this problem. Thank you.
Rick, do you have a comment?
So David pointed out that tariffs are an old-fashioned solution for an old-fashioned economy. The economy where they worked of the 19th century. We didn't have crazy supply chains where, cars use parts from, 50 different countries. Movies use 10,000 person crews from 50 different countries. And Trump is 79 years old. You can be 79 years old and with it, but you can also be somebody who's just not up to date. Excuse me, I have COVID.
Sorry to hear that, Rick. Hope you feel better
Thank you.
quickly.
Thank
I've
you.
said it twice.
Another export from Asia. It's called COVID. But we'll get into that later. Okay, we'll bring in our friend from Canada, Sasha Starr, because we know that's an important issue in Canada. What are they doing over in Canada when it comes to tariffs? Sasha.
Well, what I would like to mention is that Canada is by far biggest trading partner of the United States in the world. And therefore, the strategy of, okay, here's 15% on one side, and here's 15% on the other side, in this situation simply doesn't work. It's not going to work at all, and it's not going to be accepted either. On the other hand, I'd like to know how David will answer this very simple question. With the European Union, US will charge 15% tariffs on all European products, whether it's car or food, it doesn't matter. Yet European Union will not charge US anything or European Union importers. There will be no 15% or 10% or even 5%. There will be zero tariffs on US production. How you explain that aberration?
Well, first, you're telling me something I didn't realize. You're telling me that I know that we're going to charge them 15%.
Yes.
I know that. There are exceptions for steel and aluminum.
Yes.
Steel and aluminum is 50% globally, okay? But what you're saying is that we're not going to have to pay any tariffs at all on anything that they
It's
import.
not you. No, it's not you. It's European importers of US goods.
No. Let me clarify what I'm saying.
Okay.
So we're gonna so to the extent that we import things from the European Union,
Yeah.
then they will have to pay 50. Oh, well,
They don't pay anything.
hold on. Our importer will have to pay 15%, and then they have to decide whether or not they're going to pass it on.
Right.
Or you're saying that rather than there being reciprocity, that the deal is that importers in the U.S. have to pay 15, but
No.
importers in Europe pay 0.
Yes, you got it. Go just any source and see the details.
Well, and that's a good deal for the U.S., don't you think, David?
No, I don't think so.
No,
David, please tell.
Wait.
No.
We export.
We're having to pay it.
Our goods, there's no tariffs on them as they go to the EU.
Hold on, two ways to look at it.
Okay.
We're having to pay a tax. They don't have to pay a tax. Okay? I mean, that's basically what the situation is. Now, frankly, it depends upon what the goods and services are. Everybody's making a big deal about American automobiles in Europe. In my personal opinion,
It's a joke.
in my personal opinion, the only kind of automobiles that people might want to end up buying in Europe that are from the U.S. are EVs, okay?
But there are Chinese EVs which are much better than US.
Let me finish.
Okay.
I said maybe. I didn't say they would, okay?
Oh, okay.
EVs, certain sports cars that we have, okay? and F-150 trucks. And that's it, okay? But the Europeans, the truth is, and I can attest to this, my own household, the Europeans in general have better automobiles, okay, than the U.S. has. And when you talk about Japan, which is not Europe, okay, when you look at the size of their streets and everything else, I mean, the average size of our cars would not be attractive to them. But I'll have to look at that, Sasha. You're telling me something that I didn't know, okay? So you're basically saying that that it's not reciprocity is basically what you're saying.
No. My explanation to that is very simple. American products by and large are uncompetitive in Europe. So therefore, if you will put, never mind 15%, even 3%, they will become even more uncompetitive. So nobody is in its right mind will waste their time to produce tons of paper to create something what's not gonna work anyway. Now,
Nick, you're making a good point. Okay, you're saying that while there wouldn't be a tariff imposed, okay, that the fact that there is no tariff imposed on U.S. goods means that it may be, price wise might be somewhat more attractive.
Yeah, it might be more competitive.
Right,
And
might be more competitive, and therefore we might be able to sell more. Okay,
right, sell more and
right,
level out balance of trade. So the thing
right.
is, you can take a Ford, let's say an F-150, and sell it to a European, and let's say it costs 70,000. The Europeans spend 70,000, not 77,000, because there's no tariffs on Ford trucks that come in the into Europe, and so hence the United States has ability to sell more products into Europe. So from that standpoint, from an exporter standpoint, it actually makes more sense. And from a balance of trade standpoint, it makes sense, at least for the United States. Now, if you're importing, let's say Volkswagen or Mercedes-Benz or, European cars, they're going to cost the American public more
Yeah.
because they're going to impose a 15% tariff. But then the American public may lean more toward purchasing American products rather than spend the extra dime on the
producers will raise their prices on domestic cars minimum 10% and most likely close to 15%.
Oh, or maybe they'll keep them where they are, Sasha, and
No,
get
just
the
all the names as they are. The 15% tariffs on European goods, like the same as Japanese or any other goods, it's expropriation of taxpayers' money through these tariffs to then later on to lower taxes for rich and famous. That's all what there is to it. That's a hidden mechanism. That's all what is going to be accomplished. European Union doesn't play these games. US, yes. Okay, take money from your taxpayers, get it to rich and famous. Bravo, bravo, you've done it. But you
Well,
know what?
I
It's
think
not going to work.
I think the bottom line is what the ultimate effect is going to be. It's going to take time to figure out because it's different based upon different products. Sasha is right. For example, if let's say, for example, an Audi or a Porsche or a a similar premium car, let's say that there's a 15% tariff that didn't exist before. Most of that's probably going to get passed on to the consumer. Okay, now mainstream America is not necessarily buying those cars. All right, you're going to have higher income people that are going to be buying those cars. They can probably afford it. They'll probably absorb it. Okay, if you will. On the other hand, if whoever the U.S. competitors are of those car companies, while they now have somewhat of a price advantage, I think given that they have a duty of loyalty to their shareholders, over time they're going to raise their prices. All right. They're not going to raise their prices enough to where it ends up having an adverse effect on their ability to sell, but they'll raise it some. I have little doubt in my mind they'll raise it some, and they'll have to figure out what the equilibrium is. On the other hand, let's take something like wine. Okay, France, Italy, Germany make different types of wines that are quality products. Okay. Uh, but we make pretty good wine in California and Washington and Oregon and several others.
Drink those wines. What's the problem?
And so, the impact there, it may turn out that we end up selling a lot more U.S. wine, okay, because people don't want to pay the price differential. But it'll be a while for this.
Had wine from Italy, and it was cheaper than American or even Canadian wines. It was
Honorable David, like as more countries around the world, they are buying products from USA, And you said that maybe $300 billion US can earn or government can earn from this tariff and all of the things. It create more job opportunity for USA. It's
Yeah,
create
that's
more
part of what it's all about.
business environment for USA, and
That's
it's
part.
protect US economy, right?
Yeah, that's what, look, Trump is all about growing the economy. All right. And for example, Sharif, you made several excellent points earlier, right? Trump is not just looking at the revenue aspect of it. Okay. He's looking at to what extent can we open markets. And you mentioned that Bangladesh was talking about providing greater access to U.S. goods. All right. All right. That's good. That's pro-economic growth for the United States, right? More opportunities for us to be able to sell things. Secondly, he's looking to be able to sell more U.S. products, existing products. All right. You mentioned that Bangladesh has said they're going to buy some Boeing aircraft. Okay.
Yeah, 25. Yeah,
25 Boeing aircraft. Okay.
yeah,
Uh, uh, you also mentioned that if you look at a lot of these deals, a lot of these countries are saying we're going to commit to invest so many hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States to
yeah,
be able to build plants in the United States. So more things are, more things are built in the United States. That's employment opportunities. That's economic, that's GDP growth. All right. And that way they get to avoid the tariffs to the extent that there are any tariffs. So he's really looking at this as a businessman. Now,
yeah,
what's different, and Sasha, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. Okay. You know, obviously, you know, Trump has made a lot of progress with regard to a lot of conflicts around the world, except for Russia, Ukraine. He has not made progress on that. He's obviously extremely frustrated with Putin. I think he's now coming to the understanding that Putin's a bad guy, and you can't deal with him in good faith. And so now, what he's talking about doing is somehow trying to impose very high tariffs on countries that are buying energy resources from Russia. Um, and that would be, or Iran. Okay. In other words, trying to use tariffs as a way to try to encourage certain countries not to buy things from Russia because energy is what fuels their war effort.
David, actually, the problem is this all sanctions against Russia. It started in about more than 10 years ago when Russia invaded and took over Crimea. Russia is getting very, very skillful of avoiding the sanctions, of breaking the sanctions. And such enablers like China and India are doing great help for Russia too. So it has to be really a very meticulous approach from all angles to stop and enforce actually these sanctions, if and when they will be announced. I don't understand the 50 days doctrine that usually Trump goes with 2 weeks doctrine. Now he went for 50 days. Although, the only explanation what I found is that there have to be some adjustment done in if this Russian oil will not hit the market due to the very successful enforcement of this embargo or tariffs or whatever it might be, then many countries have to prepare themselves to alternatives, how to deal with this, and so on. So there is not just the oil itself; it's a banking methods, how this oil is being paid for, and many other aspects of this business. So he decided he was waiting for 6 months to do some kind of deal with Putin. Obviously, it doesn't work. But you see, on the other hand, he doesn't want to go full-blown war against Putin. I'm not talking about real war or a nuclear, God forbid, war. I'm talking about like completely uh, disembarked from this course that he was leading on the last several months. So it's still he's thinking that one way or another the war will be over in a year, in 2 years, but it's going to be over at some point. So once a peace will be reached, then there is a great opportunities to trade with Russia, to have all kind of projects and how they call it Geschäft politics with Russia. So if that's the case, then he doesn't want to burn all the bridges.
Yeah, yeah,
That's my opinion.
yeah. He's a businessman. He doesn't want to burn all the bridges, and I would agree with you that the sanctions have not been effective. The direct sanctions on Russia. All right.
But sending weapons to Ukraine, that's gonna be.
Oh no, I understand that. That's right, and because of Putin's behavior, it's more likely that that's going to continue and potentially be upscale. But here's what's different. Now we're selling them to the Europeans, and they're providing them to the Ukraine. So that's another example of a business deal, right?
Yeah.
Before Biden was just giving them to Ukraine, right? Now we're going to sell them to the European Union, and they're going to give them to Ukraine. Which again, that's a businessman. That's economics, all right. But here's what's different, Sasha. What's different is he's talking about secondary sanctions, and by secondary sanctions, what I guess out of this is the sanctions aren't imposed directly on Russia. The sanctions are imposed on countries that are helping Russia evade the sanctions. Okay, the ones that are purchasing things from Russia that are fueling the war effort, and mainly energy resources. Same concept applies to Iran. By the way, this morning I think he changed the 50-day deadline to 10 to 12 days from now.
I heard that.
I think he changed it to 10 to 12 days from now because he just believes that, you know, either he's skeptical that Putin's going to change. And I've said before on this program, and I still believe it, that I think in the end, this thing's going to end in a stalemate. And we're probably going to end up having a situation similar to what happened in Korea, that, you know, Russia is going to end up occupying the territory that it has. The hostilities will cease. Ukraine as a sovereign nation will still exist, but 20% of the country will be occupied by Russians. Ukraine won't agree that it's their territory. There'll be a disagreement there. The government in Kyiv won't be toppled. And so they'll still have sovereignty over 80% of the country. You know, Ukraine will end up going into the EU, but there's a real question as to whether or not it will be a member of NATO, because that takes unanimous agreement. Right now, that does not exist, but who knows over time.
Excuse me, you're talking about Ukraine being a member of NATO?
I said I do not think that that's assured. Okay.
Yeah.
Because it takes unanimous agreement from all NATO countries, and that does not exist right now. Okay,
Yes.
You know, but EU is a different story. I think even Putin has said that he doesn't have a problem with Ukraine joining the EU.
But I want to tell you something about Russia keeping, say, approximately 20% of Ukrainian territory.
Correct.
It's not going to last long at all. And I'll tell you why. Remember history of Second World War, and right after that, Ukrainians were defiant of first Russians and then Germans. And once the war was over, they had a partisan army and they have a resistance army. And even 10 years after the end of the war, from 45 until 54, Ukrainian armed units, they were terrorizing Red Army. They couldn't do anything against them for 9 years. So today, when they will be fighting on their own territory against Russian invaders, do you think Russia has capacity to sustain a large enough army in Ukraine to resist that? I don't think so.
No, but I also, as I've said before, you know, Ukraine then was part of the Soviet Union. All right, it was part of the USSR. Okay, and Russia occupied most of Eastern Europe for several decades.
Yes.
After World War II. And I also believe that because the Ukrainians have performed in such an outstanding manner, okay, as compared to the Russians, and because of the degradation of the Russian conventional military capabilities, I don't think Russia is going into NATO. That you know, and one of the reasons that Ukraine can't be part of NATO now is is because of Article 5, right? I mean, they're at war. But there may be a loophole, Sasha. And let me tell you what the loophole might be.
It's a Germany in 1954.
Hold on. Here, the loophole might be Article 5 talks about a country that is invaded, right?
Yeah.
Well, one could make the argument that means prospective. And therefore, it doesn't automatically create Article 5 merely because the fact that they were invaded in the past. In other words, it's a prospective. But I think from a practical standpoint, there's no realistic possibility of admitting Ukraine into NATO until after the war is over.
David, the secret is that NATO needs Ukraine much more than Ukraine needs NATO.
Well,
the Ukraine is the most capable, the strongest,
the most experienced.
Not even through experience, although that's very important. It's by sheer numbers, by motivation. Let's see if Ukraine, is busy fighting Russia. Let's see in 2 weeks' time, Russia is invading Baltic states with a total population of slightly over 5 million people. What is now, where is Article 5? Where is NATO? Where is all these armies? If you will take by numbers, French, UK, Germany, what is their armies? They're a joke, okay? You can tell that they will mobilize people, they will have it for the next 3 and most likely 5 years. They are unable to resist Russia anywhere at all. Yeah. Now, with American help, it could change, but are you so sure about American help? I'm not.
Well, I agree with you. The Baltic countries are the ones that are most at risk.
Well, won't the biggest change take place when the Putin administration is gone? In other words, he's not going to be head of state forever. So at a certain point in time, Putin's going to be gone. There's going to be a new administration in Russia, and that's when there's going to be major effective change. But I agree with you, between now and then, there'll probably be a demarcation line. They'll be on this side, they'll be the other side. Ukraine will not say that we've forfeited this territory yet, but we'll engage in a ceasefire. And then there'll be a change in administration. Putin isn't going to be there. There'll be somebody new there. And at that point in time, they may renegotiate the lines.
Nick, speaking of changes, speaking of changes in administration and everything like that, there's been a change in administration to the south of our border and everything like that. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, David, but it looks like they are actually going to come to an agreement that was actually said earlier today. So Claudia Sheinbaum says Mexico will reach an agreement with the U.S. ahead of the August 1st deadline and everything like that, because of course there are certain items, including some items that people love that are smaller, because y'all were talking about cars and things like that, but they are definitely a big time distributor of oranges, and all along those lines Mexico is, and everything like that. So they are wanting to have some of their oranges come our way, even though I know that Nick loves those oranges from Florida and everything like that, being a Floridian and in the past and everything. But one of the things that I was surprised by, and I don't know if you were aware of this, David, but apparently with all of the tariff conflicts and everything else that's been going on, and maybe there was a bump in travel to Canada as well, but with all the things, even with things going on around the border and everything like that, tourism is up in Mexico 14% in the first half in 2025, which actually surprised me, and all along those lines. So I just wanted your take on that, because that I did not know, but they said the number of international visitors increased by more than 14% from January to May of this year compared to 2024. So it looks like more of us are at least visiting Mexico.
Well, first, I think that there's little question that tourism is down in the United States. And I think part of that has to do because of some of the tensions associated with the trade issue, in particular, tourism from Canada. Mexico, depends on where you go in Mexico. There are certain parts of Mexico that I would not travel to because they do not have, the government does not have control of the territory. The drug cartels control the territory, and they're not safe. On the other hand, if you talk about value for money, if you're in one of the safer areas of Mexico, it's good value for money. And if people aren't coming here, they may end up going. They may end up going there. But Americans love certain things. They love cerveza, they love tequila, they love jalapenos, and Mexico has a disproportionate market share of those three things. So, but as you know, one of the tensions is NAFTA was controversial. The North American Free Trade Agreement, which is now be subseded, overcome. It's been a new agreement exists, but remember Ross Perot, who was a friend of mine. He called it the giant sucking sound. That what was going to end up happening, it was going to cause a lot of production to go out of the United States, and in particular into Mexico. I mean, the cost, labor cost and regulatory burdens are much less in Mexico than they are in Canada. I mean, there's not a huge difference between the United States and Canada. There is a huge difference between labor cost and regulatory things between the United States and Mexico. And there's absolutely no question that Mexico benefited from that with regard to the movement of a lot of manufacturing facilities from the United States to Mexico. In addition, China tries to circumvent, certain tariffs and other restrictions by doing things through Mexico. That's another thing that's going on, in particular with regard to things like fentanyl.
Yeah, but along those same lines, because one of the other things I mentioned oranges, but a lot of people also love tomatoes, whether it is regular tomatoes or whether it is things that are made from tomatoes, like ketchup and things along those lines. So that tomato supply is also a major part of what goes on with this tariffs, and that could impact them if they don't come to the agreement. But it does seem like Claudia Sheinbaum is looking at this agreement, because there were even some people that were saying that the grocery prices could be impacted on several mainstream items. And I mentioned two of them, just regular tomatoes, but also ketchup and other things that are tomato based.
Sure.
Sasha? I think I have an answer why European Union doesn't need 15% tariffs on products from the United States. I'll tell you why. Canada is now completely reshaping its trading patterns in a view of unstable administration of the United States. And even if you will agree on something today, in 3 months it could be changed into something else, and then the additional tariffs will be imposed and so on. So obviously this is a road to nowhere. On the other hand, the many countries, including European Union and Japan and China even, they are now sourcing Canada. They have delegations from different ministries and government organizations sourcing what Canadian products they can find to replace imports from the United States. And they can find a lot of things. Canada's industrial base, their experience, know-how, is not very different from US, except that US is producing many times more than whatever Canada is producing. And it's only because of Canadian fault, because it's so easy. So you put your stuff in the truck goes across the border to the United States, unloads, you have a beer, and travel back to Canada. So that's mentality which was dominant in the last 50 years is no longer the case. Right now, Canada is being sourced and will start expanding their production. And therefore, a lot of America's products in Europe and elsewhere will be replaced by Canadian, which will be cheaper, by the way, because of virtue of Canadian dollar, and transportation routes from Canada is much more convenient. And already 2 shipments of oil from Canada to China and Japan happened, and it will be expanding. So this is should be no surprise why Canada is not rushing into a trade deal with the United States anytime soon.
Hey, just really quickly, we have a question from one of our fans.
Yeah, I saw it, yeah. Brian raises the question of whether or not the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which included a number of tax provisions, including 100% bonus depreciation provisions, could help offset the impact of tariffs. The answer is potentially. You need to look at things holistically. We got a lot of moving parts here, right? I mean, we just had major tax reform. We've got major regulatory relief. You've got the tariffs, that are coming on. You really need to look at things in a holistic and integrated fashion to understand what the ultimate bottom line impact will be. And as I said, that's going to take time. It's also going to take time with regard to monetary policy. The primary reason why the Fed has not lowered interest rates is because of their uncertainty over what the ultimate impact of these tariffs are going to be, and whether and to what extent any higher tariffs might be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. And their number one charge is to combat excess inflation. And so I think, as you know, the president's been putting a lot of pressure on Chairman Powell to try to lower interest rates. My gut feeling is they're not going to lower them this month, but they could lower them in September and they could lower them in December. Once we get a sense as to what the likely impact of the tariffs might end up being, once we know what they're going to be. Like, for example, the president and others in his administration complained that the Congressional Budget Office didn't give them enough credit for tariff revenue. Well, if you don't know what the tariffs are going to be, how are you going to calculate how much tariff revenue you're going to get? It's kind of a fundamental problem.
Right. David, though, it seems to me when Donald Trump meets with somebody, something happens. I believe he has a meeting scheduled with the Federal Reserve coming up, and maybe he'll lean on them and they'll get together and they'll actually lower interest rates. He
actually met last week. I think it was on Friday. He met.
Oh, they did.
He did a tour of the construction project that's going on at the Fed, a $2.7 billion upgrading of the Fed's facilities. And it was a little bit humorous because, he's in that business, right? He's in the construction business. Right. He was saying, they didn't do this right. They didn't do that right. And they asked him, what would you do if the thing was over budget this much? He said, I'd fire the guy, fire the contractor, right? But then Trump said something about, now the cost is $3.1 billion rather than 2.7. And Powell said, let me look at that. He says that, and he looked at the number. He says, you're counting a new building that got done 5 years ago. That was $400 million. So it was strange. He's clearly putting pressure on him. But as I said, I think the tariffs are the big issue, and that's the big issue. And so I don't expect them to lower interest rates this month, and I don't expect them to lower them anywhere near the amount that Trump wants them to lower them. Okay, but I think you could start seeing modest reductions in interest rates starting in September, continuing in December, depending upon how these tariff things shake out. And then we also have to see what economic growth was in the second quarter, right? We had a contraction of 0.5% in the first quarter of the year. A lot of that was because people were taking steps in anticipation of tariffs, right? People are expecting reasonable economic growth for the second quarter, but they're still expecting less than 2% for the entire year. We'll see. Okay.
Jacoby had a question as well. You got to get off mute.
Because the meeting with Powell, I felt was a little bit embarrassing because he got corrected on that, and that was just that falls into the narrative that is already there for him, and everybody. Well, not everybody. A lot of people already see him as not really telling the truth, and for him to come and say that, hey, it's going to be this amount when Powell turns around and says, hey, you just...
that was a little bit embarrassing. I would agree with that.
And so I want to go back to one thing that Mark brought up in terms of tourism and how that's cratering. And now we're projected to lose $29 billion. But even that was taking place, or that $29 billion was the projected number before they found out. Now in that horrible bill They threw in now a $250 charge for individuals coming to the U.S. for travelers. So I guess, Dave, my question is, how much do you think that is going to harm that tourism or tourism to the U.S., throwing in extra $250 tax to travelers coming to the U.S.?
Time will tell, Jacoby. That's news to me. I will tell you that, we need to put things in perspective. There's no question that recent issues concerning tariffs have an adverse impact on tourism. This obviously won't help. I'm not familiar with that provision, but I will say this: you have to keep in mind that the United States has an economy of about $30 trillion. So 29 billion out of 39 trillion is nowhere close to material. I'm sure it's a concern for certain cities more than others. Okay, for example, New York. I mean, that would be a big concern, but I think New York's got other problems too that might have an adverse impact on their tourism.
The only reason that I'm concerned about it, because that hits, for me, that sounds like it's going to be one of those canary in the coal mine situations. Because if you look at, we'll just take one of our biggest markets. That's the entertainment field. That's sports entertainment. A lot of the individuals, will take even the top 10 NBA players that are out there. The majority of them come from overseas. That means that's affecting families. That's affecting fans of those individuals. Right now, there was I think it was a little league team. Was that one out of Venezuela? I cannot remember where the little league team came from. They no longer can come because their actual visas were denied or something like that. It was something strange, and it's all dealing with what's going on now. So now add on this $250 travel visa that coming to the U.S. When we have all of these sports, because we're big on sports, that's one of our biggest industries. That's going to hit Little League. That's going to hit soccer. That's going to hit cricket. That's going to hit the NHL. That's going to hit the NBA, the NFL, all of our sports.
I would think, Jacoby, that it's going to be less of an issue with regard to professional sports because they're big money businesses. But to the extent that you're talking about amateur and youth, clearly that's a big issue. Although, as you know as well as I do, there are other issues associated with Venezuela, which we do not have very good relations with, and is a communist country. So we don't even recognize the legitimacy of their government. So there are other things going on there.
Yeah, I just have some anecdotal evidence about tourism because I flew to California last week from Spain and then flew back. The flight from Spain to California was completely booked, completely sold out. The flight from California to Spain was empty. About 30% seats were vacant. And here may be the reason, because tourism can be very complicated. The dollar is very weak against the European dollar right now. So the Europeans can buy more American junk, and they can go to our hotels and spend more money because, frankly, the euro dollar is much stronger than the American dollar in the last year. In other words, you basically make 10% just by going to the United States. Where if you come here, your dollar is pummeled. I mean, the thing is, you're going to be humbled and pummeled once you exchange your money for EU dollars because you're not going to get very much, David. I mean, it's just the nature.
The dollar has gone down this year, and gold has gone, and silver have gone up. Yeah.
So coming to Europe, people just weren't coming to Europe, but a lot of Europeans are going to the United States mainly because of the exchange rate. And not only do you get hit on the exchange rate, you also get hit by the people that exchange your money. And so I route everything through a London bank before it comes here, because if you go direct to Spain or the EU, you're going to get killed on not only just the exchange rate, but the bankers who are going to take their commissions on the exchange. By that time, you give them $1, they give you back 50 cents. you know? And so you're going like, what's going on here?
Well, I think that analogy though is tough because it's easier to come from Canada and Mexico, the bordering countries, than it is to come from Europe. And so there's a little bit more of a nostalgia or a fantasy when going to these particular places, because we get the same thing going to Europe from the U.S. But so that means we got a lot of tourists from the places that now we're going to charge not only higher tariffs, but also $250 when you're. So that's going to kill a lot of the tourism. And now I've heard rumors, but I haven't looked into it too much because I think it's just all speculation with the World Cup and their concerns over, visas and immigration, because that's going to be a big issue because a lot of the individuals that are coming from these countries that are playing in the World Cup are coming from these countries that we're at odds with.
Yeah, it's going to be even tougher when the Olympics hit in Los Angeles.
Soccer is not to be considered a professional sport only in U.S. The worldwide is the sport number one by far. There is nothing that can stand close. Even.
Global football, yeah.
Actually, cricket.
Cricket beats global football. I'm talking about soccer. We call it soccer in the U.S.
To me,
football is getting at
cricket on some other show, but it's a joke. Now, what I tell you something is that this next World Championship in soccer is arranged for next year, 2026, in 3 countries: Mexico, U.S., and Canada. So U.S. is close to be eliminated from the equation, so it will be split between Mexico and Canada, simply because U.S. will not be able quickly enough to comply with all the visa requirements from, there will be, I think, 64 teams from around the world, and perhaps Venezuela will be one of them, and Iran will be another of them. And both are pretty strong national teams. So in this case, I don't understand how U.S. will handle this situation.
I'm going to do a point of information from Rick Rosner because he's not here. It says soccer has the most popular sport in the world, 3.5 billion fans. Then cricket, 2.5 billion fans. The number 3rd is basketball, 2.2 billion. And I can tell you in Spain, basketball is very popular.
Yes.
And it's like a huge sport. So I guess you're looking at soccer, then cricket, then basketball in that particular order.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Let me mention something before we get done because we've only got a minute left.
Yeah.
With regard to this $250 fee, all right, that could be the concept of a user fee. In other words, there are costs associated with trying to be able to process people when they're coming in and out of the country. My personal view, $250 is too high. All right. I mean, I don't know where they come up with $250, but I think that's ridiculous. Okay. But one of the things you're going to start seeing going forward is rather than raising taxes overall, trying to be able to come up with more of a user fee approach to where, to the extent that somebody gets a benefit from a service, they're having to pay for it because not everybody gets the benefit for the service. Not everybody can travel internationally. Most Americans can't.
We'll help them out with that one, but we do want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and our panelists from around the world, from the USA to Bangladesh to Canada. And we'll see you next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Keep close to your pocketbook. Bye-bye.